The most fundamental issue is, of course, that the urban transition is really taking off in most African countries and cities. And, as we stand today, the expectation is that urban populations will double over the next 20 years across the continent. So similar growth rates to Asia. But the problem is, in the current condition, up to 70% of people who live in African cities live informally and have an informal job. So the reality is that the nature of the urban system and the urban fabric is the complete inverse of how we normally think about cities and urban planning and so on. So of course, within that context, the problems are enormous. So firstly, questions are vibrant economies to generate a tax base to invest in urban infrastructures. Secondly, the high degree of informality creates a whole series of governance dysfunctionalities. And so to achieve political reform and to achieve policy reform in that context is really difficult because most of the political parties are vested in this dysfunctionality. So, so to really think one's way through that is really complicated. And then a problem that's layered over that is, of course, that the investment that is coming in is creating, as Stephen Graham and Marvin would say, sort of a fractured, splintered form of urbanism and an urban landscape. So you have pockets of middle-class mimicry, if you will, of the sort of American suburban model, and all of the worst associations with that in terms of urban design, architectural form, and so forth, and large terrains that is just excluded off that grid. So so the problems are just so enormous, and at the moment there's very little, and I suppose this is the biggest challenge, that it is not on the agenda of the Pan-African development agencies like the ADB and so forth. It is not on the agenda of most national governments because there's still such a deep anti-urban bias within dominant political sentiment, and it's not on the agenda of elites either. So so to really work out where one is going to get a critical mass to come to terms with the gravity of the situation and how to intervene is really difficult. So you do need people that's relatively well versed in a series of clear arguments about why Africa's economic prospects and a whole range of other development ambitions are basically stunted because we can't come to terms with the urban challenge, and really do that in a savvy way. So that's the one set of issues. The second challenge, I would say, is really to fundamentally rethink the core tools and instruments of urban development practice through the lens of, in a way, how the real city functions. So that requires an epistemic shift in terms of understanding different modalities of urban functioning, but on the other hand also recognizing that even though it's different, you still need instrumental modalities to intervene. And that needs to be done in a way that both helps us to build a vocabulary about what this informality or the real city is, but at the same time, in very material, concrete terms, make some difference in what, of course, is a really horrid and abject set of conditions for the majority of urban dwellers. So I think it is both at, at this policy advocacy side. There's definitely a theoretical epistemic shift that needs to be achieved around what constitutes the real city, as opposed to, if you will, the problematic city, or something that somehow we need to solve in a way, but rather to understand that that's the source of the innovation that's required, combined with a technical proficiency on how one can deploy concrete tools and instruments into that environment. I mean, it's hugely impressive. It's and really inspiring that, that there's a group of people that is really confronting this incredible challenge for us as a species, in a way, because just because your global footprint is so enormous as a country, and to really think through, not to shy away from thinking through what this may mean. And given that everything that exists in the current, if you will, political policy governance system is completely ill-equipped to deal with this fundamental transition that will happen over the next 50, 100 years. So, so just almost the audacity to take this issue seriously on its own terms, wrap your heads around it and what it may mean. Yeah, it's hugely inspiring. I mean, that's really, I feel very profoundly energized in terms of the work we're trying to do in the African context. And the second thing is the modality of how you're going about it, in the sense of creating this really open boundary approach where clearly you're setting frames and parameters, but you're inviting critical scrutiny from a bunch of academics and professionals and people who, you know, are in the same domain of practice and knowledge generation, who, you know, will be critical and who's going to take apart your assumptions and your concepts and so on. So that's incredibly brave. In terms of your core challenges you've got to watch out for, obviously there are many. But I think, you know, I think fundamentally is to, in a way, remain experimental for quite a long time and to give yourself the space to do that. I think it'll take a good 4, 5, 6 years to crack the curriculum, really crack it, and to, in a way, anticipate that and use that kind of energy and approach as part of, you know, of your methodology. Now that, of course, you know, raises a very complicated managerial questions for a new institution and so on. So I suppose that's the second big thing. The sort of third challenge or big issue is to figure out how to insert your experiment and your learning into the global political economy of knowledge, because this is unprecedented. And I think because of the way you've configured your curriculum strategy and content areas and the way you're trying to, in a way, define the boundaries of this new epistemology that is required, you know, for let's put it this way, for a grounded, theoretically grounded approach to urban practice. You know, that's really the future of urban studies in a way. You know, so for me, you know, I think there's a huge responsibility, you know, that comes with doing this, because in a way you're going to also have to do that translation into this global political economy of knowledge, and it is profound, you know, because it's what drives resource flows in the higher education field.